Hello everyone, my name is Forrest from Rocky Mountain School of Photography, and today we have a cool product to talk about. The Profoto C1 Plus and the Profoto C1. Both are new lights from Profoto, relatively new, they came out about a week ago from Profoto, that we were really excited to get our hands on. So what I want to do in this review is break down my pros and cons of this light, and also let you hear from some other employees of the school that also used it. To get started, I do want to take all of our thoughts and opinions and break it down into a simple pro and con list. Let's go ahead and start with the pros. Pro number one is the size. These lights are extremely small. If you're a professional looking for a small light, or if you're an iPhone photographer and you just want to pop a little bit of light into your iPhone pictures, this thing is awesome. The fact that the Profoto C1 is so tiny means you can throw it in your camera bag, throw it in your pocket, and you have really nice Profoto quality wherever you go. Number two, on the topic of Profoto quality, this thing is extremely well built. It's battery powered, which is awesome. It's got a nice rechargeable battery inside of it. You don't have to deal with AA's like you would with a speed light, and it just feels good. The magnetic bit that holds on the different modifiers on the C1 Plus is really satisfying. Listen to this thing. It's amazing. Ready? Woo, it just sounds so good. Very clean, very nicely designed, very well thought out. On top of that, the app is very well built. The app lets you control the color temperature of the lights as well as the brightness of the lights, something that you don't really get with most other small lights. You sometimes have some of those options, but the fact that the app is so easy to use and easy to control these things, I definitely give Profoto a nice thumbs up for that. Also, like I said, color temperature can change. The ability to make these lights warmer or cooler is super awesome. One additional thing to mention is that a lot of people, I think, will be comparing these lights to your traditional camera flash or speed light. And one big thing that these Profoto lights has is a modeling lamp. They have a continuous light that is in addition to the strobe that pops. And that continuous light makes it very easy to visualize your light source and your lighting ahead of time before actually having to pop the strobe. The strobe here being the LEDs that are inside of this light. So if you look at one of these lights, there's actually a set of LEDs in there that is for the modeling lamp, and there's a set of LEDs there that's for the strobe. And that's something that a lot of speed lights or camera flashes don't have. Now, those are my pros. I want to talk cons now for a second. The biggest con with this thing is power. Because it doesn't have an actual strobe in it, an actual like popping flash bulb, instead it uses LEDs, the power is a little bit lacking. Now, the C1 Plus does have two stops, I think 2 stops more power than the C1, but even the C1 Plus on maximum power is only ever going to be a fill light. It's never going to be a key light in a brightly lit environment. So if you're like outside, even on a cloudy day, it's going to be really hard. You're going to have to get the light very close to your subject in order to get the C1 Plus to be overpowering whatever the ambient light source is. Usually this is going to be looked at as an accent light or a fill light versus an actual key light. On top of that, the C1 is not compatible with the grids and different attachments that the C1 Plus is. Like I showed you guys earlier, the C1 Plus has this nice magnetic attachment system for grids and gels and things like that. The C1, which is cheaper, does not have that. In addition, the C1 does not have a 1/4-20 mounting pin in the bottom of it. It only has the USB Type-C port, whereas the Profoto C1 Plus has a mounting hole there so you can put this thing on a stand. Now, I think that's pretty important. I want to stop for a minute and just say that. If you're expected to use this light to create amazing images, you need to get it out of your hand, right? If you're holding your phone in one hand and your light in the other, you're very limited in the range of motion that you can use. So I really recommend those of you who are going to pick up this light, budget in the fact that you need a stand for it as well, or some way to mount it, and also make sure you get the C1 Plus so that you have that mounting hole for the stand. Super crucial. The last con I want to talk about is the price. I think the problem that we're going to run into with this light is that as a school, we really recommend the C1 Plus. Like I said earlier, I think having the stand mounting hole and being able to work with the different modifiers makes this a better choice over the C1. Well, the problem is that's a $500 light, which is a lot of money. And the problem with this light is it's about as bright as a bright flashlight. It's not extremely amazingly bright. Now, yes, I know, it is brighter than a flashlight, but it's comparable. And it's definitely dimmer than a speed light or a camera flash that you would traditionally be using. Now, are there pros to this over that? Yes, color temperature, variable exposure, all that stuff for sure is an advantage of this over a flashlight or a speed light. But the problem is just the cost. If you're a photographer out there and you are looking for to get started with lighting, to get started with off-camera flash, I would recommend a $100 speed light. I'd recommend picking up like a Yongnuo or a Godox flash on B&H for $100, putting it on a stand. You're going to get more power than the Profoto C1 can provide. You're not going to get variable color temperature, but you're going to have the power to do a little bit more than this light can do. Now, that's not to say if you're an iPhone photographer, this will work with an iPhone, and that is a huge advantage. You're not going to get a Godox or a Yongnuo flash to work with an iPhone. So I think the problem here is that Profoto priced this for professionals, but they're targeting it at iPhone photographers. And I think that's going to be a little bit of a problem moving forward. We'll see how it goes, but that's just kind of the conclusion that we all came to. I want you guys to keep watching if you're actually thinking about buying this light, because you're going to hear from the other people who used this on staff, and they're going to provide their opinions as well. So here are the thoughts from Zoe, from Quinn, from Sarah, and from Jeff. I'll let you hear from them right now.
What's up, guys? I'm Quinn, and I'm going to share a couple of my thoughts about this Profoto C1. So, on the creative side of the world of photography, whether you're an iPhone photographer or a DSLR photographer, I do think this light could help with some creativity. The size and shape of it is really cool, I think, because it could possibly be in the frame. It's little and it doesn't have a handle or anything other than just the light itself and the little dome on top of it. So you could put it in the frame, you could hide it like inside of something and have that thing lighting up. You could be a lot more conceptual with your photography, and you could create some really different sort of things. Just because of its size, you could hide it inside of the frame and use it as just a little extra light rather than the main light source. The other thing I think is cool about it is that there's nothing else. That's all I think is cool. Okay, that's it. That's it. That's all.
Hey guys, I'm Zoe. After using the Profoto C1 for a couple of days now, I would still probably prefer natural light.
Hi guys, I'm Sarah. So I took out the Profoto C1 last night and I played with it with my iPhone, and a couple things stood out to me. First, it really was only useful if you turned off the smart features of your phone's camera system. So the light was really the only thing that was providing light or color. So essentially control your phone's exposure manually and control your phone's white balance manually. When we did that, it worked great. If you let the phone control the exposure and white balance, it literally looked so bad. So basically the TTL function is super not useful, and I found that if we just turn that off, I could get a good quality of light, and I could make this really act more like a studio light, which is what it could be useful for. However, the other thing about this is it's just kind of expensive for what you get. So I could, use a flash and get a nice, beautiful pop of light that's even more powerful than this, and it would cost less. I could get a nice knockoff flash that's pretty easy to use. So the only advantage of this over a flash is that it has that modeling light feature. So it still has a considerable amount of power, but it has that modeling light. And so you can kind of see how your light's shaping your subject before you take your picture. Other thing about it, I used it with my iPhone, and I could see myself playing with it with my DSLR, but in general, I think that's probably the most useful for low light iPhonographers, because it just adds a pop of light where there isn't one. In general, though, I think natural light is always going to be a little bit more appealing because this light source is so small. It's just small, and a light source that's this small is always going to be a little bit harsher. So I used a piece of paper, just a plain piece of copy paper, and even that amount of scrimming was super useful. So really, it's like you kind of have to have accessories to make it worthwhile.
Lastly, I wanted to take a look at the C1 Plus and the C1 and see what I think of it just from, a professional photographer's point of view. I mean, let's talk about the pros and cons of this real quick from my perspective. Pro would be that it's got a sleek design. Profoto, it's one thing they've always been good at is having really nice design to their products. It's a nice handy travel size. And I think if you can get the hang of it with your iPhone, it's great. Great little flash for the iPhone. Why not? Another nice feature is there's a 1/4-20 thread on the bottom, so you could potentially screw this onto the top of a light stand or put a tripod plate on it or find a way to rig it onto a stand so you're not necessarily having to hold it if that was of concern, of which it is for me. I also like that it can sync to the Air remotes, that I can use it with a camera as opposed to just with an iPhone. And I think it does pretty well connected to a camera. The experiments that I did connecting to my DSLR, it fired just fine once I kind of got the hang of what I was needing to do with it. In fact, I tested it out with my iPhone, and I had a very hard time getting very consistent results. Some of the things I was struggling with was just not really knowing what it was doing in any given situation. It seemed to perform better when it was in the auto mode than it did when I threw it into manual and had control over my own exposures with a phone. But the minute I connected it to my camera, I had full control over what was happening exposure-wise with it, which gave me a lot more flexibility with it. All right, so I guess those would be the pros. However, it's not very powerful. When I tested it with the light meter from 3 feet away at ISO 100, full power, I was able to get f1.4 out of it. That's not a lot of light. I tend to judge things based upon what my standard speed light can get me, which is closer to f16 or f22 from about 5 feet away at full power. So, it's a pretty dim little light source. So you really have to crank up your ISO pretty high, which introduces noise and things like that into your shot. See if I can take this little magneted cover off. Then there's another diffuse disc under here, and then there's another diffusion sort of bulbous cover here. That's it. There's no other than some colored gels and a little grid attachment. There's no other way to really make this a larger, softer light source. It's a pretty hard, harsh light for most of it, unless you're bouncing it against a white wall or a ceiling. That's as far as hand holding this thing, aiming it at your subject, you're going to get some contrasty shadows. Then you're talking about getting an adapter that you can put an umbrella in, and then a light stand, and next thing you know, you're up to having to spend more money to soften this light more, and it's also robbing it more power, so you have to jack your ISO back up. I also found, when I'm trying to hold on to my phone, I've got my phone and I'm trying to manipulate it, these phones keep getting bigger and bigger. I'm going to drop my phone, or I might drop this thing. It's real slick and smooth. I'm going to drop one of these things at some point. Is it going to be my $700 phone or my $500 flash? I don't know. Either way, that would not be a good thing. Overall, I think it's kind of expensive for, not being very bright and producing a light that's kind of a harsh look, really. It's got the plus and minus on the side here that allows us to power it up or power it down ostensibly, but it's kind of arbitrary. We don't really know powering up how much. 1 stop, 1/10 of a stop, 1/3 of a stop, like what the increments really are. It would be nice in future designs if they could actually give us a little LED readout that lets us know. Full power, 10. Stop down from there, 9. Stop down from there, 8, 7, 6, and maybe 10th stops in between, but that's probably asking too much. I find with the little plus minus, I don't really know what's happening with that exactly. The best shots I got were when I connected this thing via an Air remote to my camera. I photographed Quinn in the studio. I was generally pretty pleased with the light that I could get from it as I diffuse it with other diffusion panels and work with it in a studio environment. Overall, it's pretty good. I mean, I had to still be up at ISO 800 in order to see, the effect of the light, which wasn't really super ideal. Probably not a problem with any of these mirrorless cameras that can have a really high ISO. In fact, that's probably your best use of it if you're gonna, work with it and have a decent raw file, would probably be to use a mirrorless camera that has a really high ISO. So I'd say, in short, it's a pretty nifty toy for your iPhone, but it's a $500 toy, the C1 Plus. The C1, doesn't have the threading on the bottom, can't sync with the Air remote, and won't they won't slave off of one another. You have to use the iPhone in order to get that feature unlocked. So those factors would make it, in my opinion, not necessarily a professional's tool. It would definitely be for those who just want to take some snaps and have some flash, maybe throw the color gels on and have some fun. But for $500, the chances of dropping it are very high. It's not very powerful, and it's limited in terms of the kind of quality of light you can get out of it without bouncing it against a white wall or ceiling, or getting into buying more things like an adapter and an umbrella and a light stand, and then you got to get it in real close to your subject. Kind of getting away from the point of this small compact travel thing that's supposed to be used with your phone. I would say get it if you've got $500 to spend and you only want to use it with your iPhone. Otherwise, the features that you can get from more professional strobe units dwarf what this thing can do, and you'd be better off just getting a more professional strobe unit from a number of the many manufacturers out there. So if you like this video, hit the thumbs up. If you didn't like this video, hit the thumbs down. Feel free to leave a comment. We'll get back to you. And you can subscribe if you like this content, either down there or up there. You can hit that little bell down there, and it'll notify you when we have more videos up. And thanks to Canon and B&H for providing some of the equipment to make these videos possible. Thanks for watching.